Hello and welcome to Ontology Talk. I'm Adam Pease, and today I want to continue the series of formalizing terms and show you how it's done, formalizing terms in SUMO. And today I thought, just because it came up in some conversation, I might formalize the notion of a carabiner. Carabiner, for those of you who are not rock climbers, and I'm not much of a rock climber either, but I've seen them before and used them once or twice, are things that allow you to clip your rope or your climbing harness to something else and keep you from falling. It's generally under the class known as protection, or at least that's what climbers call it. So a carabiner is, as you can see here, just a sort of a loop of metal with a little hinge in it, so you can get your rope or a clip or some other kind of thing in and out, so that you're either connected by this link, chain link, or not. One critical thing is, there are carabiners you might have to hold your keys. Those don't have a lot of strength to them, but other carabiners that you use for climbing have specific rated strength. So the first thing that I want to think about is how do we distinguish climbing carabiners from your sort of casual keychain carabiner. And there's a site that I found that has all sorts of information. So this is also part of what one does as an ontologist. You might have some passing familiarity with something you need to formalize, and you need to do some research. Just as though you were defining in a dictionary or an encyclopedia, you need to get some more information if you don't have all that information in your head. So carabiners look like they have a major axis, which is really strong. If the gate is open, the hinge is open, it's less strong. Minor axis is not very strong. There's a certification that real carabiners used for climbing should get. You can see that if they've tested it in falls. They want to make sure that if you fell and this thing was supposed to hold you, that it actually would. So it looks like it's pretty hard to have a fall where the force is greater than 5 kilonewtons. So in fact, on the major axis, they certification makes sure this is over-engineered. It's going to be required to take a 20 kilonewton force. In the worst possible case, I guess, if the gate is open, you still should be able to hold the worst possible reasonable fall strength of 5 kilonewtons and so forth. So I don't know if we'll have time, and we certainly won't have time to get into all that, but I can at least make a start. So let's look at some other stuff. So I was going to show you some other things in SUMO. So the first thing I was going to start out was the notion of a chain link, a closed form of metal rod. But the problem with the carabiner is it's not closed. It's only closed some of the time. It isn't fundamentally closed. But we can see from the definitions involved in SUMO for the notion of chain link that we make use of this attribute of being a ring torus shape, so sort of a fundamental shape from analytical geometry, so informally the shape of a donut. Well, that's what we want. We want a shape attribute. We want to talk about the carabiner having that shape, but only some of the time. So that's probably important. It's not necessarily a chain, but it is one link in the chain. So let's start maybe with that, and then we're also going to have notions of force and braking strength and axis, and maybe even let's take also a look at certification. I don't know if we have certification. No, we don't seem to have a notion of certification. So we have certificates, but not a certification. So that might be another thing to talk about, is defining the notion of certifying something as meeting a particular standard. So let's try to get started with that. So at the very least, a carabiner is a device, and let's give it some documentation. So here I'm using the SUMO JEdit editor. It has an additional few features beyond just your bare text editor, so it can do syntax checking and color coding. We'll get to that in a moment. So let's carabiner in the English language. And here, might want to just reuse somebody else's definition if it's precise enough. And so one thing I often do is look at Wikipedia also because Wikipedia has a nice friendly license on it that lets me, with attribution, use their definitions. Thank goodness for the Creative Commons license. So let's look at Carabiner. That might also get us some additional background. So Carabiner, a special type of shackle, a metal loop with a spring-loaded gate. And safety critical system. Okay, so yeah, that looks great as a start. So let's try that. We'll just reuse Wikipedia's definition with attribution, of course. Okay, so there we are. So let's say from Wikipedia. I usually put that in brackets. Okay, and we'll quote it, and let's see if do I have my format option. Let's format axioms. That's not doing it for me, so I'll just do it manually. It could be because I haven't yet saved it as a KIF file, so let's try that. So let's get rid of some of this extraneous stuff, references, because of course I'm not copying the references in there, so I don't need these numbered things. Let's get rid of that, and let's try to save it. We'll call it carabiner.kif. Okay, great. At least now we've got our color coding, which makes things a little bit nicer. All right, and as usual, we'll give it a term format in English language, Carabiner. And a nice thing that you can see here from the Wikipedia definition, it also gives us that there's actually an alternate spelling. So, and if that's a valid thing in English, let's give it that. So another point here about, we've got an identifier, Carabiner with a capital C. That's just an identifier. It has a nifty mnemonic function to it, just like any sort of standard programming language identifier. It's not, however, the definition. And it's also not the printable label. So we keep all those things distinct in SUMO. Right. So let's talk a little bit about what a carabiner is. So we have an instance C of a carabiner. Certainly want to say that it's made of a metal. Let's just check. I think that does take a class of metal. So let's go back here to our SUMO browser called Sigma, and material. All right, so material has as its second argument a corpuscular object, an instance. It's a domain relation, so it takes an instance. But the substance that it's referring to here, it's related with a domain subclass. So that's saying that the first argument to the relation material is a subclass of substance, and metal is a substance. So good, that's what we want. So let's turn this. All right, so very simple axiom. Just say that if you have a carabiner, it's made out of metal. Okay. Let's also say that if we have an instance of carabiner and it holds during some time t, so here we're getting a temporal logical axiom beyond first order logic, or at least most of the time. That's another issue about how to encode temporal information, but in this case it's at the very least syntactically higher order beyond first order. So it holds during this following period t that the attribute of carabiner, let's spell it right at least, the carabiner is device closed. This is something that's already in SUMO. Let's just take a look at that, and I think device closed probably could stand some improvement. Now there it is. So I looked at it previously, and yeah, it's a device state attribute. We said almost nothing else. And part of that is, what does it mean to be closed? That's something that let's maybe I'll save that to another video where we can explore what does it mean to be closed. And so this is just sort of a placeholder for now. So it holds during that if we have the device closed, then it also holds during that period t that the carabiner C has the shape attribute of being a ring torus, right? It's informally shaped like a donut, just a very thin, funny shaped donut. Okay, and if it's, well, then we should say the opposite specifically, because unless we say it explicitly, the machine does not know that. Let's see, so then we've got device closed, so let's talk about saying device open, that it holds during that period that it does not have the attribute of being a ring torus. Okay. And let's now talk about how do we distinguish the carabiner from the climbing carabiner from that carabiner that holds your key ring. So I think the good way to do that is to put them into two different classes because they really have completely different purposes. So let's call it climbing carabiner is a carabiner, and then subclass, let's call it uncertified carabiner is also a kind of carabiner. I mean, they have the fundamentally the same shape, but they have a different purpose. So a climbing carabiner in English language, a carabiner that has the purpose of and is certified for use as protection in rock climbing. Okay, let's just take a look, see if we actually have rock climbing. That would be another useful thing. Rock climbing. Hey, look at that. Great. We do have rock climbing as a sport, so that helps us. Well, it doesn't really have much definition, just somebody who does rock climbing is a rock climber. Okay, so we can do a lot more there, but let's at least start making that hook into what we already know. At least we'll know that it's a sport. So let's say that if we have a instance of a climbing carabiner, that it has the purpose that they're rock climbing. Rock climbing is a sport, okay, and a sport is a game, and a game is recreation or exercise, which in turn is going to be an intentional process. Okay, so it's a process we're talking about. That's good. So let's say it has the purpose that it is an instrument used in rock climbing. So let's say there exists, climbing carabiner exists rock climbing. Okay. Oops. Instance RC is rock climbing, and that instrument of rock climbing is a climbing carabiner. Right, so again, the same issue I talked about in a previous video. Right? It's still a carabiner, it's still a climbing carabiner, even before it's actually been used by a rock climber in rock climbing, so it's important to talk about the purpose of it, which doesn't change It was manufactured to be used in rock climbing. Before it's used in rock climbing, it's still a rock climbing carabiner, and then once it's actually used, it remains a rock climbing carabiner, and it's being used for its intended purpose. Right, so this is a sketch showing you how we start with one thing, we expand to a lot of others. To really give this a full definition, we're going to have to go back and we're going to have to more fully define the notion of a device being closed and a device being open. Maybe I can do that in a future video. We're going to need to talk about things like bending or breaking strength. I don't think we actually have that. We do have notions of force in SUMO, the notion of newtons and kilonewtons. We have a nice ontology of units, so we've got that we can reuse. But there's some new stuff here that we're going to have to add in to give it a firm definition, give these things a firm definition. So you'd like to know that, say, if you had say a business that was selling these things, that would be very objective and clear when you're selling stuff that's sort of a novelty for use on your keyring, and when it's serious equipment with a rating and certification that you'd actually use in climbing. Right, so I hope this gives you a little more information. Also shows you the nice color coding in JEdit, and it can be used for a lot of other features. I mean, most importantly, when we get a critical mass of this sort of thing, we'd like to start be able to ask questions, as I think I've shown in one of my previous videos, to actually use theorem proving to prove whether these things are consistent or these definitions can give you the answers that you would expect in your domain. All right, so that's it for now, and we'll save maybe fleshing this out or moving on to another concept for a future video. Thanks very much.